when Plessy versus Ferguson was debated. He was the only dissenting judge. He said, this is not right, because Plessy lost the case. He said, this is not right. And he made a statement, and I'm going to read to you the statement that he made. He says, the white race, or the privileged race, deems itself to be the dominant race in this country. And so it is in prestige, in achievements, in education, in wealth, and in power. So I doubt not it will continue to be for all time, if it remains true to its great heritage and holds fast to the principles of constitutional liberty. But in view of the Constitution, this is the part I want you to hear. But in view of the Constitution, in the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior, dominant, ruling class of citizens. That's one of the reasons America exists. We didn't want a king. There is no caste here. Our Constitution is colorblind, and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law. The humblest is the peer of the most powerful. The law regards man as man and takes no account of his surroundings or of his color when his civil rights, as guaranteed by the supreme law of the land, are involved. It is therefore to be regretted that this high tribunal, the final expositor of the fundamental law of the land, has reached the conclusion that it is competent for a state to regulate the enjoyment by citizens of their civil rights solely upon the basis of race. He says, how dare we be so arrogant as to think that we can decide this? In my opinion, the judgment this day rendered will in time prove to be quite as pernicious or wicked as the decision made by this tribunal in the Dred Scott case. And I want you to look that up if you don't know about it. That too is a sad decision. One of our former presidents, 53 years ago, had this to say at a commencement address at Howard University. Quote, Negro poverty is not white poverty, or non-privileged poverty is not privileged poverty. Many of its causes and many of its cures are the same, but there are differences, deep, corrosive, obstinate differences, radiating painful roots into the community and into the family and the nature of the individual. In other words, these things go deep and wide. These differences are not racial differences. He tells us what he thinks they are. They are solely and simply the consequence of ancient brutality, past injustice, and present prejudice or prejudging. They are anguishing to observe, but they must be faced, and they must be dealt with, and they must be overcome if we are ever to reach the time when the only difference between Negroes and whites, or non-privileged and privileged, is the color of their skin. Sounds a little like Martin Luther, doesn't it? Okay, can't get any answers on that. It's okay. So back to the four. I'm almost done. The privileged and the non-privileged united in their protests. When those four young men sat at that counter, they started a revolution that reached around America. It was dynamic, to say the least. And as you can see, the picture to the right, they say, can't eat, don't buy. they found out that economics, not color, not race, economics was a determining factor. So let's do a catch-up. They sat down on February 1st. On February 2nd, just the 4 young men sat down on February 1st after having made purchases, and they went to the counter. The waitress came over and said, "What do you boys want?" Another very derogatory remark. Please don't ever use that to any black male. "What do you boys want?" One of them said, "We would like to be served." And she said to them, "I can't serve you." He said, "Oh, but you've already served us." And they pulled out their receipts. They said, "We bought combs and brushes and gum. We've been through the store and we bought many things. You've already served us." "Well, I can't serve you here," she said. And went off and got the manager, and the manager was distraught. And read the story yourself. Or watch the movie. There is one. Well, they sat there until it closed. And then on February 2nd, they came back with 29 other students. And the press was there clicking pictures. By February the 5th, now this started on day 1, by the 5th day, 300 students, privileged and non-privileged, the privileged understanding this does not make sense. 300 students had joined the protest at Woolworths, paralyzing the lunch counter and other local businesses. Heavy television coverage of the Greensboro sit-in sparked a sit-in movement that spread quickly to college towns throughout the South and into the North, as young blacks and whites, as young non-privileged and young privileged joined in various forms of peaceful, keyword, peaceful protests against segregation in libraries, beaches, hotels, and other establishments. By the end of March, the movement had spread to 55 cities in 13 states. Though many were arrested for trespassing, disorderly conduct, or disturbing the peace, national media coverage of the sit-ins brought increasing attention to the struggle for civil rights for the non-privileged. And by the end of the month, Woolworths had decided that they would serve the non-privileged, and they started with their staff. These protests that started with these young men led to desegregation in the South and to the Civil Rights Bill enacted July 2nd, 1964. It was a landmark civil rights and U.S. slavery law in the United States that outlaws discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Over time, it ended unequal application of voter registration requirements and racial segregation in schools, at the workplace, and by facilities that serve the quote-unquote general public known as public accommodations. That was a historic movement. But you know, law can only do so much. As that judge said, it's not the law, it's what's in here. It's the perspective that each of you have about each other that makes the difference, whether or not these things go into effect. When you look at these 4 men, you see them as the students they were and as adults. There is a monument, a couple of monuments actually, that have been erected to them. The Smithsonian Library in Washington has taken, when Woolworths finally went out of business, they for, and North Carolina gave to them 4 seats representing those 4 men, and part of the counter to set up in the Smithsonian Library or Institute. Very fascinating. You really need to go watch the movie. It is fascinating. So I ask you, were they courageous or were they troublemakers? They had a paradigm shift. They had only seen America from the standpoint of being denied, of being set aside, of being thought less of. They wanted to join the party. That's another way to put it. They wanted to join the party. They weren't content seeing just one part of the perspective or one part of the picture. They wanted to know the other side. And in finding out the other side, they helped others to do the same thing. Now let's talk about self-worth briefly. I'm not going to spend that much time on self-worth. But the sense of self-worth, the definition of self-worth, is the sense of one's own value or worth as a person. This young man was one of the 4. We have witnessed what true self-worth is in the lives of these 4 young men. Joseph McNeil, one of the 4, upon returning from Christmas break in New York, was refused the sale of a hot dog at the Southern bus terminal. His sense of self-worth became the motivational force for the other 3 to join him in his protest against Jim Crow laws. He knew who he was as an individual and refused to continue being treated like a second-class citizen. We each need to know and understand that we are worth more than we appear. I'd like to read you Rear Admiral Black's definition after I just go through this. February 1, 1960 marked the day that 4 young men, through an act of courage and a simple request, I want to be served, changed America. I'd like to end on this note, which took place on February 2nd, 2017, when Rear Admiral Barry C. Black, chaplain of the U.S. Senate, shared a simple yet profound statement. And I want you to think very seriously about this last statement. This is what he said. He recalls how, as a child, my siblings and I had been challenged by my mother to memorize